The following program, Search the Scriptures, is brought to you by the Highway 5 South Church of Christ in Mountain Home. Speakers are Keith Sharp and Trevor Campbell. We invite you to call or write the church to submit questions for the speakers to answer. We'll provide answers from the Bible to your questions.
Well, Trevor, we had a question before us last time on how shall we care for children. And you and I both talked quite a bit about that and have more to say. So can you address yourself this evening to more about taking care of children?
Oh, sure, definitely.
I knew you could. Trevor, I'm going to let you introduce yourself and the church in Payette.
Sure, thanks, Keith. Yeah, my name is Trevor Campbell, and I preach over in Payette with the church that meets there on Highway 62 in Payette on the north side of the highway. We're right next to the tractor dealership and next to the new Dollar General, so we're pretty easy to find. And if you're in the Marion County area and like to come and worship or study the Bible with us, we meet on Sunday mornings at 10 a.m. for a Bible class, 10:45 a.m. for a worship service, and you'll also see on the screen there is my phone number. You can call me there. If you have a question about the church that meets there, or if you want to have a Bible study, or have any questions at all about the Bible, or if you have a question you would like Keith and I to discuss on the program, give me a call there. That number is 870-435-2737.
Thank you, Trevor. You folks over in Marion County, please keep the Payette Church of Christ in mind. Visit there. It will be to your benefit. And, of course, you'll be an encouragement to them. If you live here in Baxter County, we invite you to the services of the Highway 5 South Church of Christ. We meet 1 mile south of the Highway 62-412 bypass on Highway 5 on the way down to Salesville. As you're going south, we're on the left, just past Good Samaritan. We invite you to our services on Sunday. We have Bible classes at 10 o'clock for all ages. And then we have an 11 o'clock worship assembly. We have also a 2 o'clock assembly and Bible study. And then we also have services on Wednesday. On Wednesday morning at 10 o'clock, we have a ladies' class. You ladies are invited to that, studying prayer. And then on Wednesday evening at 7 o'clock, the church meets and we sing and pray, and we have a Bible class then also. So you're invited to all those services of the Highway 5 South Church of Christ, south of 62-412 bypass. Now, if you have a question that we can answer on the air, and that generates the subject matter on this program, is the questions you ask us. If you have a question for us, and of course Trevor's told you how to be in touch with him, you can be in touch with me, Keith Sharp, by calling 870-321-5746. Or you can email me at keithsharp2021@gmail.com. Or you can write to Post Office Box 263 in Mountain Home, 72654. Let us know what your question is. And now we have several questions we've got to get to yet, and we want to do a thorough job on the question, so we won't rush through it. But as we can, we'll get to your question. We won't tell anybody who asked the question. We never do that. But we will address your question on the air. We will tell you not what our opinion is, not what a church creed says, but we'll tell you what the Bible says concerning that question. Well, Trevor, the question before us is, how shall we care for children? How are children to be cared for? Trevor, go ahead and address that some more, please, sir.
Well, sure, yeah. Last week we did discuss some physical aspects as well as spiritual aspects in the growth of children and helping them to grow and bringing them up. One of the last passages that I looked at with you last week was in the 4th proverb, in which Solomon talked about being a young child and being instructed by his father David. That was King David there, and how David gave him instructions and was training him as a young man. Well, in Deuteronomy chapter 6, this was part of the law of Moses, that the parents were to instruct their children, and furthermore that all the people were to talk about God's law. It was to be a common place for them to be speaking about God's word and His commandments and of His ways. And I want to read a little bit from Deuteronomy chapter 6, and this is something that is just as applicable today. This just isn't something for the old law. It is something applicable today as well for Christians. So in Deuteronomy chapter 6 and verse 4, Moses says, "Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your strength. And these words which I command you today shall be in your heart. You shall teach them diligently to your children, and shall talk of them when you sit in your house, when you walk by the way, when you lie down, and when you rise up. You shall bind them as a sign on your hand, and they shall be as frontlets between your eyes. You shall, you shall write them on the doorpost of your house and on your gates. So in this text here, God is talking about His Word and His law being always before their eyes. And I really like, and I believe this is applicable today as well, this portion of the text in which he talks about teaching them diligently to the children. So children are to be instructed in the ways of God and given the commands of God from a young age to train them up in the Lord. And in verse 7 there, he says, talk of them when you sit in your house and when you walk by the way and when you lie down and when you rise up. So this is just part of the everyday conversation that we're talking about God and who He is and talking about His commandments, His laws. And with children, it's very good to make application in real time. You know, you're driving down the highway and, you know, you stop at the stop sign and, you know, you tell your children why you stop there. Because God wants us to obey the laws of the land, because we're to be subject to the governing authorities. You know, that's taking God's laws and making an application in real time and in the moment. You know, here what God wanted them to do was just to be talking about His laws and talking about Him just throughout their daily walk of life, just during everyday events, and always having His law before them. Now, He goes on from there to talk about when they enter into the promised land, and they're going to be dwelling in houses that they didn't build themselves. And they're going to be eating from vineyards and drinking from vineyards that they didn't plant and so forth. God's going to give them this land. He says, you know, beware lest you forget, verse 12, the Lord who brought you out of the land of Egypt from the house of bondage. You know, sometimes when things are really good and we're rolling right along and financially we're stable and everything's good, sometimes folks have a tendency to forget about God. And forget that God has blessed them with these things. What God did not want them to do was to forget what He had done for them. So they were to talk about these things. They were to talk about their exodus out of Egypt. So, you know, when we take this and apply it today, and I think it's very applicable, you know, when we're with our children and with children, doesn't have to be your children even, when you're with children, to talk to them about the things of God, to tell them the Bible stories, or relate those stories to their own lives and how they should be living their lives, and just training them and bringing them up in God's Word. And so that's a very important aspect the Bible shows us, about how to care for children. Brother Keith?
Thank you, Trevor. And Trevor is emphasizing, this is so good, the spiritual aspect of raising children, our spiritual obligations to children. And I've been approaching it from a different angle, but we're hopefully getting all that needs to be said about this, or all that we can think of to say about it. And by the way, if we leave out a part of this subject that you think needs to be addressed, give us a call or write us, get into contact with us, and let us know what your question is so we can address it on the air. But I want to go ahead and bring up another aspect of this matter of taking care of children. The question that we're dealing with is, how are children to be cared for? And I talked about the fact that if they're orphaned children, I went on the basis of James chapter 1, verses 26 and 27. If they're orphaned children, then we ought to take those orphaned children into our homes and care for them. And that's particularly true if those orphaned children are kin to us. If they're part of our own, as the Apostle Paul talks about in 1 Timothy chapter 5. Well, all right, so here we're going to say somebody that's taken orphaned children into his home, and now he has more financial obligations than he's able to take care of. What can be done about that? Well, the Lord's made provision for that. He's told us how to handle that. From the very beginning, the Lord's church took a collection on the first day of the week of its own members. And by the way, the first we read about the use of that collection, and that's not the only way the collection was used. The collection was also used for the spread of the gospel, what we call evangelism. It was also used for what we would call edification, building up brethren. But the first thing in Acts chapter 2 and in Acts chapter 4 in Acts chapter 6, and in Acts chapter 11. In all three of those, when the church was young, that collection was used for the help of needy brethren. And so I'm going to give one passage. We'll turn to Acts chapter 4 and just look there at verses 34 and 35 as there's a collection taken from the local church, and notice how it was used. Acts 4, verses 34 and 35. Nor was there any among them who lacked, for all who were possessors of lands or houses sold them, and brought the proceeds of the things that were sold, and laid them at the apostles' feet. Now at this time, the church had no elders. The apostles were acting in the place of elders. We don't read about elders in the church until Acts chapter 11. But in Acts chapter 4, the apostles are acting in the place of the elders. They laid them at the apostles' feet, and they distributed to each as anyone had need. And so here I am as the head of a household. I have more children than I can take care of. I'm in need because I can't fulfill my own obligation. That's where the church steps in. And the church helps that Christian who is unable to fill his own obligations. And by the way, do you know the Lord has given the church everything that it needs to take care of its own needy, including families who have taken in orphaned children and that have now more financial obligations than they're able to take care of. In order to see that the needs are taken care of, we need some oversight, somebody to direct matters. We need somebody to take care, to distribute it, somebody to take care of the physical aspects, and then we need the finances to take care of it. Well, we've already seen from Acts chapter 4, and I want to look at another passage that shows the same thing. In 1 Corinthians chapter 16, here's the only way that the church is given the right to raise the money to take care of its work. Now, in this case, it was specifically for the matter of what we call benevolence, helping the needy. Now, there's other passages that show that the church funds can also be used for evangelism and edification. But let's read 1 Corinthians 16, verses 1 and 2. Now concerning the collection for the saints, as I've given order to the churches of Galatia, so you must do also. Let on the first day of the week, let each one of you lay something aside, storing up as he may prosper, that there be no collections when I come. So each church of the Lord, each church of Christ, takes a collection from its own members every first day of the week. And one way that collection is used is benevolence, helping needy Christians. But what about those Christians that have orphans? Well, first of all, we have elders in the local church who have the oversight of the local church. In 1 Peter chapter 5, verses 1 and 2, the Apostle Peter says, the elders who are among you I exhort, I whom also an elder, a fellow elder, and a witness of the sufferings of Christ, and also a partaker of the glory that will be revealed, shepherd the flock of God which is among you, serving as overseers, not by compulsion but willingly, not for dishonest gain but eagerly. So the church is to have elders who are to oversee, make the decisions for the local church. And so it has oversight. And there are deacons that serve the local church so they can carry out the directions of the elder. In 1 Corinthians chapter 1, verse 2, we read about the deacons of the church. Philippians chapter 1, verse 1, the Apostle Paul and Timothy addressed himself to the elders with the bishops or to the saints with the bishops, that's elders, and deacons, the servants of the church. And so the church needs to have deacons, servants, who carry out the direction of the elders, and then we take a collection from the members of the church. So what do we need? We need those who oversee it, we need those who execute it, and we need the funds to do it. And the Lord is set up in the local church. We don't need some organization built only by the authority of men to do this work. We have within each local church everything that is needed to take care of the needy in that local congregation. We have the elders to oversee. We have the deacons to do the executing, the distributing, and we have the members to give of their means each first day of the week so it can be carried out. And so if there's families in that congregation who have orphans that they've taken in, then they can be taken care of. The family fulfilling their obligation and the church fulfilling its obligation to its own members. Now, one other thing, and I'll turn this back over to Trevor. Well, what if a local church has so many orphans or so many needy that is unable to care for its own? Well, the New Testament takes care of that also. The Lord has planned for that as well. Beginning in Acts chapter 11, when brethren in Antioch took a collection and it was distributed to the needy saints in Judea, and it was sent to the elders of the congregations in Judea. That's Acts chapter 11, verses 27 through 30. There's other passages in the New Testament that show the church. We gave 1 Corinthians 16, verses 1 and 2. You could read all of 2 Corinthians chapters 8 and 9. And the church took collection, and part of those funds were sent to congregations and other places who were in need, who had more needy than they could take care of, and the sending churches simply sent it to the churches in need. The churches in need that received those funds could then distribute among their own members as the elders saw the need and as the deacons distributed. And so within the church, without building any human organizations, every benevolent need can be taken care of if we'll just follow the Lord's plan. Don't build organizations that the Lord never authorized. Just follow the Lord's plan, and all the needs can be taken care of in the way the Lord has appointed in His Word. Isn't it amazing how wise the Lord is, that He took care of all these problems long before we ever thought about it? Well, Trevor, I'm going to turn it back to you.
That was good, Keith. I'm going to go a different direction. Something that we haven't talked about at all, I don't think, is discipline. And I got to thinking about that. So the Proverbs deals with that a number of times, talking about the discipline of children. I'm going to read some of those and discuss them just a little bit with you, beginning in the 13th proverb. So the 13th proverb in verse 24 says, "He who spares his rod hates his son, but he who loves him disciplines him promptly." So, we can all relate to this, I think. It can be difficult to discipline. But what the Bible teaches is that if we truly love our children, then we are going to discipline them. It's to their benefit. And notice he also says, disciplines him promptly. Quickly to correct that error. But, he talks about the rod there. Now, the rod was symbolic there of discipline. Not necessarily that you were to use a rod on your child, although I guess you could. But not that that's what the Bible is instructing there. But it was a symbolic item concerning discipline. There are some children that don't respond to spankings. Others respond pretty well to spanking. And, I had some friends, and a friend of mine actually, when we were younger, his parents could whip him, and it didn't faze him a bit. He'd turn right back around and do whatever wrong he'd been doing. Did not faze him. He didn't feel it. He was numb. But in any case, his parents found other ways when they took things away from him, or took games or things or toys that he enjoyed away from him. Boy, that hurt him. And so they found ways to discipline him. So it's not necessarily, whipping the child, although the Bible certainly does not condemn that. In fact, it seems to point towards that in the Scriptures. In the 22nd proverb, and in verse 6, it says, "Train up a child in the way he should go, and when he is old, he will not depart from it." So discipline and training, putting good healthy practices into their lives, and so that when they grow old, they'll continue in those things. In verse 15 of the same proverb, Proverb 22, it says, "Foolishness is bound up in the heart of a child. The rod of correction will drive it far from him." So again, there's that word rod, the rod of correction, talking again about discipline. Foolishness is bound up in children. and it's bound up in their hearts. But they do need discipline. It's necessary. In the very next chapter, Proverbs 23, and in verse 13, he says, "Do not withhold correction from a child, for if you beat him with a rod, he will not die. You shall beat him with a rod and deliver his soul from death." All right, so he is more than encouraging. He's instructing us. God is instructing us to discipline the children, and it's for their own good. Notice there what he says. If you beat him with a rod, he will not die. The point is that by disciplining them, you're going to save their soul. And that goes back to what we saw there in the 22nd proverb, verse 6. Train up a child in the way he should go, and when he's older, he won't depart from it. You're training them to put good practices into place. And then verse 14 there, beat him with a rod, and you'll deliver his soul from hell. So ultimately, that should be our ultimate concern, is the spiritual life of our children and other children. I know Brother Keith, you talked a lot about the care of children, providing for them, and that's certainly seen in the Scriptures. I wanted to touch on some of the spiritual aspect, because that is also of the utmost importance. And so there are a number of proverbs here that we can look at, these things concerning discipline, training a child. So discipline is necessary. Brother Keith?
Excellent, Trevor. You're so right. I want to make a couple of comments on the passages and tie in another passage similar to it that Trevor has mentioned. I read in one commentary, and I believe this is correct, that beating the child with a rod, first of all, had in mind older children that were harder to do something to that would cause them enough pain to correct them. And the rod there was something modern day. You've probably heard, I believe it's Singapore, where they use caning as a punishment. That's probably what that was. It's something that would not kill or maim, but would inflict pain. Discipline is done out of love for the good of the children. And so discipline should not be something that injures the child, but it must be something that brings pain to the child. And Trevor's made a good point. Some children are simply are not affected by physical punishment. You have to find another way to punish them, but they need that punishment. Now, many years ago, I was using these passages that Trevor used with a young couple that had a small child, and they replied, "Oh, those are Old Testament passages. They don't apply to us today." And they did not discipline their child. Well, I haven't been around them in many years, so I don't know how that child turned out. I suspect how they turned out, but I don't know. But turn over to Hebrews chapter 12 and see if this sounds anything like what Trevor was reading from the Proverbs. In Hebrews 12, I'm going to begin reading in verse 5. "And you have forgotten the exhortation which speaks to you as to sons. My son, do not despise the chastening of the Lord, nor be discouraged when you are rebuked by him. For whom the Lord loves, he chastens, and scourges every son whom he receives." And by the way, that's a quotation from Proverbs chapter 3. "If you endure chastening, God deals with you as with sons." Do you see what that implies? A child who is not chastened is being treated as if that child is not the child of that parent, as if the parent doesn't know that child. "If you endure chastening, God deals with you as with sons. For what son is there whom a father does not chasten? But if you are without chastening, of which all have become partakers, then you're illegitimate and not sons." You're being treated as if you're somebody else's child if you're not chastened when you're a child. "Furthermore, we've had human fathers who corrected us, and we paid them respect." Fathers, do you want to know why your children don't pay you any respect? Well, you start chastening them, and they'll pay you respect. "Shall we not much more readily be in subjection to the Father of spirits and live?" And I could go on from there. But no, that's not just an Old Testament principle. That's a New Testament principle as well. And of course, it's in Ephesians chapter 6, verse 4, that summarizes the obligations that fathers have to their children. Well, Trevor, we have a little bit over 4 minutes left in the program. Do you have more you would like to say about that?
Sure, I've got something. Well, aside from discipline, I've got something.
Sure, go right ahead.
All right. I'm going to jump over to 1 Peter chapter 3 and talk about adornment. we like to put our children in nice clothes, nice things. Those that can afford it, put them in name brands or even designer clothes and shoes and so forth. There's nothing wrong with that. You want to have nice things for your children, put them in nice clothes. But the Bible does talk about a more important adornment. And though this specific text isn't talking to or about children or to parents about children, it actually is specifically talking to women. However, it's just as applicable to all of us. I want you to notice what it says here in verse 3 of 1 Peter 3. 3:3 says, "Do not let your adornment be merely outward, arranging the hair, wearing gold, or putting on fine apparel. Rather, let it be the hidden person of the heart, with the incorruptible beauty of a gentle and quiet spirit, which is very precious in the sight of God." So what Peter stresses is the importance of adorning ourselves with a gentle and quiet spirit. Now, he is talking to the women specifically, but this applies to men and all as well. Gentle and quiet is what Jesus was. He matches this description. He had a gentle and quiet spirit. The word gentle can also be translated meek. I think that's actually a better translation. Yeah. Meek and quiet. Meekness has to do with a humility before God, humility and respect and reverence of God, so that we just accept His will and do His will as Jesus showed us in His example on this earth. And that's going to carry over into how we treat our fellow man. So we're to have a meek spirit. But also, he says, quiet. That has nothing to do with talking softly or not speaking out loud or anything like that. A quiet spirit in the text, the word quiet, refers to somebody who's not uproarious. It refers to someone who doesn't cause strife and problems and incite others to be riotous or anything like that. You don't have to make a sound. You could type something on your computer, on your smartphone, and post something online that incites others and causes trouble. You could be making a lot of noise without saying anything at all with your mouth. So that's what he's talking about here, having a meek and quiet spirit. Jesus was the example of that. So what Peter is stressing is this is of greater importance. It's fine to have put on nice things and have nice clothes and to put our children in nice things, but more importantly, our children need to be adorned as well. Show them how to have a meek and quiet spirit. Brother Keith?
Trevor, thanks so much. And again, I appreciate it because you're bringing in aspects of this that I had not thought about bringing in. Hopefully, we've pretty well covered the subject of how shall children be cared for. And what Trevor's been emphasizing, and this is excellent, is, well, what are the needs of children? Well, you can't know how to provide for children unless you know what their needs are. And so he's talked about various aspects of that, and that's very, very good. I want to say just a little bit about that word quiet. It also means somebody who does not meddle in other people's affairs. There are people who are nosy, who are always sticking their nose into other people's business, into things that do not pertain to them. And some people even try to manipulate other people so they do what they want them to do. That's the opposite of a quiet person. We're to be people who are more interested in our own affairs than trying to settle the affairs of others. Doesn't mean we're not concerned with people's spiritual well-being, but it does mean we don't try to run other people's lives for them. We learn what is our business and we stay out of other people's business. When we're doing that, we're being quiet. We're not being meddlesome, officious, meddling in other people's affairs. Trevor, why don't you say the last word and then you can bring the program to a close.
All right. Well, the things we've discussed, we've talked about both physical and spiritual. Both are very important. I like what you brought to the table, Brother Keith. But if you're listening to the program, watching the program tonight, we thank you so much for watching. Send us your questions. Join us next week, and we'll see you then.
Thank you for watching Search the Scriptures. If you have a Bible question or comment, you may call 870-321-5746, email keithsharp@suddenlink.net, or write Keith Sharp at P.O. Box 263, Mountain Home, Arkansas 72654. And your question will be answered on the air. Be sure to watch next week at the same time for another edition of Search the Scriptures. Until then, the Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord make His face shine upon you and be gracious to you. The Lord lift up His countenance upon you and give you peace.